What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I know we might have left you guys on a cliffhanger a little bit in the last episode, but we are going to get to that last question. And joining me to give the insight of the Cavaliers, none other than the man behind Hey Chris himself, it's Chris Fedor. What up, Chris?
Ethan, how are you, man?
I'm doing well, and I know you got to get some New Orleans lunch, and I know that made you feel good.
Also made me feel nice and full. It's a good thing that I walked 14,000 steps today, because otherwise I would not be feeling very good about myself after the amount that I consumed for lunch.
14,000 is insane. And speaking of New Orleans, I wanted to talk about the Pelicans game really quickly before we got into this last question. I mean, Chris, a lot of fans were skeptical about this game, even with Donovan Mitchell coming back and how Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland pair and things of that nature. But it looked like the Cavs got back to their old selves, heaving up threes, making said threes, playing defense, and moving the ball around and getting assists for each other. It felt like one of the best games we've seen, pretty wise. Like, it was a beautiful game to watch, and how everybody was getting involved and getting the ball moving in transition, which was a huge emphasis for the Cavs pregame. What was your thought of how the Cavs rounded this out?
Pretty much the same as you. It's the way that we've come to expect the Cavs to play when they're close to full strength, when they have most of their most important players. It's the way we've come to expect the Cavs to play if they consider themselves a legitimate title contender. It really was beautiful basketball. That's what Donovan Mitchell said. And I think we can't overlook the unquantifiable impact of Donovan Mitchell. Like, there are ways to quantify what he means to the Cavs' success. There's no doubt about it. We can look at the on-off court ratings. We can look at their record with him in the lineup, 33 and 15 now, by the way, which is the fourth best winning percentage of any team extrapolated over the season. But there's an unquantifiable impact that he brings to this organization. There's a sense of belief, there's a sense of hope, there's a sense of just his presence and what that means for everybody else that shares the court with him. I know that he's been on talented teams in the past. I know that. But there's a reason why this guy has never missed the playoffs in his career. He elevates everybody around him. He empowers everybody around him. George Niang got out of the shower tonight in the visitors' locker room. He was dripping wet. He saw the crowd around Donovan Mitchell for his post-game press conference and just shouted, "Donovan Mitchell effect! It's a real thing!" And it is. There is a Donovan Mitchell effect that is felt when he's on the floor and when he's not on the floor.
And you guys can look for a more in-depth Donovan Mitchell story from Chris, the man himself, on tomorrow's cleveland.com website. Until then, we're going to get a little bit into this question from our guy, Matt in Los Angeles. He's a subscriber for Subtext, which you should be
He
too.
was at the game tonight too, by the way. He was at the game in New Orleans. He was visiting his son who goes to Tulane. And Matt actually came up to the media section briefly, introduced himself, and said hi to me. So that was awesome.
So Matt, the man, the myth, the legend, you can become close with me and Chris and have a little friendly relationship if you too were subscribed to Subtext. If you want to give us your questions for next week's episode of Hey Chris, this is the way to do it. To do so, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from Chris and me. We want to get to the bottom of Matt's question because it was a good one. And Chris made us stop the last podcast to make it this entire episode. So you're in for a treat. The question itself from Matt was, with the Cavaliers cycling between the second and third playoff seed, rank the matchups from best to worst regarding the Cavs' first round opponent possibilities. And Chris, I had this all planned out this morning with all of the seatings and things of that nature. And when I tell you we had to shift this to later, and I knew how much the standings were going to jumble up, it was just like watching on NFL Red Zone, having multiple games on at the same time, trying to keep track of everything going on. But the matchups are so difficult to come up with because of how much the records and the standings are going to change. I know some teams have 18, some teams have 16, 17 games left. But I'm going to start in the West and I'm going to go through this really quickly because obviously this doesn't pertain to the Cavs right now or the first round of the playoffs. But I wanted you guys to get a little taste of how just messy things are over there in the West. The top three seeds are separated by a game, with the Nuggets having the edge after their win over the Heat on Wednesday by just half a game over the Thunder, who are only half a game ahead of the Timberwolves. And while the Thunder play on Thursday with a chance to tie for first, the T Wolves have to wait until Saturday to play and watch the standings shift as they may. The fifth through the eighth seed in the West are divided by a game and a half. And the Kings win over the Lakers on Wednesday, tied them for the sixth best record in the Western Conference with the Phoenix Suns. Whew, Chris, that's just so close knit that, and we compare a lot between the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference. I've heard it my entire life. The West is harder than the East, but they're really similar right now with how close they are. So let's move to the East. The Cavs win over the Pelicans on Wednesday, gave them the same record as the Milwaukee Bucks, and they're fighting for that second and third spot in the Eastern Conference, with the Knicks just 3.5 games behind them. And the Magic are only a half game behind the Knicks in fifth in the East, with the sixth, seventh, and eighth seed divided by just one game. In the second or third seed, which I believe the Cavs will finish in one of those spots and not fall all the way down to the fourth seed. But thinking of the second and third seed, the Cavs could have a possibility of playing the 76ers, Pacers, Heat, and the Magic if they drop from the fifth seed. But with the re-addition of OG Anunoby, the way Josh Hart has been playing, and Jalen Brunson's scoring ability on any given night, I don't see the Knicks falling lower than fourth. But they do have the possibility of rising to second or third. But that wouldn't affect the Cavs if they fell to the fourth seed in that scenario. That's an overall look around the league and how important these last stretch of games are to the season and the team's playoffs hopes and dreams. But Chris, let me know what you're thinking between the 76ers, Pacers, Heat, and Magic, and who the Cavs' best and worst matchups would be in your eyes. Because I think we can agree the Knicks would be the worst matchup, and hopefully, without a massive slide down the standings, the Cavs can avoid them by hanging one of the top four spots if the Knicks rise through the standings.
It doesn't feel like the Cavs and Knicks are on a first round collision course anymore. For a lot of the season, even it did feel like that. It felt like that was going to be the 4-5 matchup because of Philly, because of Milwaukee, because of Boston. But we all know what's going on with Philly. We don't know when Joel Embiid is going to be back. They're a completely different team without Embiid. They're still trying to figure out how to best utilize Buddy Hield, who was brought in there to kind of play around Joel Embiid. So there are a lot of things that the 76ers are figuring out. And because of that, it just feels like the Knicks are not a realistic opponent for the Cavs in the first round, which is a good thing. No doubt about it. The Cavs struggle against the Knicks. They can't score consistently against the Knicks. Tom Thibodeau outcoached JB Bickerstaff in the first round series last year. The Knicks are big, physical, strong, mature. They're probably going to get Julius Randle back soon. Mitchell Robinson could come back before the end of the year as well. So it is good that the Cavs are out of that range where they would probably face the Knicks in the first round and could be looking at an early playoff exit. But I think you forgot a team that's also going to be in the mix here. The Chicago Bulls are playing a little bit better than the Miami Heat. Miami has lost 4 in a row. Chicago has played better without Zach LaVine. DeMar DeRozan is playing extremely well. And if you look toward the end of this season for Chicago, Washington twice, Houston, Portland, Detroit, Atlanta, Brooklyn. There's some tough games mixed in there too, with New York, with Boston, but they get New York at the end of the season when the Knicks might be resting some of their guys. They might be trying to preserve them for the playoffs. So all I'm saying is there is a path to Chicago, which right now is 32 and 34, to move up the standings a little bit in that 7-8 range if Miami doesn't figure it out. Everybody keeps waiting for the Heat to figure it out, to turn it on, but they've lost 4 in a row. It helps that they're playing Detroit coming up back to back, but they also have some tough matchups toward the end of the season. The Heat do. And Eric Spoelstra said earlier today that he doesn't know when Tyler Hero is going to be back. And that's obviously a loss that they're feeling right now in terms of offensive firepower, in terms of creating more dynamics on the offensive end, in terms of diversifying the offensive attack as well. So I wouldn't rule out something happening where the Bulls find a way to creep back up. I don't know that it's the most likely outcome, but I don't think we can just ignore it completely because they're only 3.5 back of the Heat, only 4.5 back of Indiana. So I think if we're ranking it, the team in the range for the Cavs, right now they're the 2 seed. Milwaukee's the 3 seed after tonight, based on tiebreaker stuff and whatnot. The team that I think in that range that the Cavs would want to avoid is Miami, just because you would be in a 7-game series against arguably the best coach in the NBA. Playoff Jimmy is a real thing. Championship medal is a real thing. Tyler Hero should be back by then for the playoffs. Bam Adebayo knows how to turn it up in the playoffs. They've got tons of big game experience. And stylistically, they're just a pain in the ass to play against. So if the Cavs were to go all season, earn the 2 seed, and get a first round matchup against Miami, that to me would be the worst possible outcome for them. We saw what Miami did in a 7-game series against the Bucks last year. We've seen what Miami has done in playoff series against what seemed like better, more talented teams. So that is the team that looms out there that I think would be the most dangerous first round opponent for the Cavs, even more so than Philly, because I just don't know what version of Joel Embiid the 76ers are going to get.
Yeah, Chris, and I mean, I agree with you. The Miami Heat, like we talk about just the Heat culture. There has not been a team that has ran the play-in gauntlet like they have. There's not a team that has that kind of mindset when it comes to the playoffs. And you hear it, you see it all around the league. Playoff Jimmy is coming. And that is a sight to see almost every year. I mean, you know that LeBron James goes dark during the postseason, and you see all of those guys that really are able to tap in. And I say all of those guys, but I really only think there's like two, three, maybe four guys that like really lock in on the playoffs like that. And I don't think the Cavs want to see the Heat either. If I had to rank the best matchup for the Cavs, I would say the Pacers. Just the size that the Cavs would have and also be able to keep up with the Pacers offense. What are your thoughts on that, Chris?
I also think going back to the toughest one, I think it would benefit the Cavs to avoid Orlando because they're tough, they're physical, they're very handsy, they're huge. They also have athleticism and length. Stylistically, that's the kind of team that could give the Cavs problems. That's the kind of team that could potentially outmuscle the Cavs. So I think Orlando would be a playoff war in the first round if it was Cavs Magic. I've looked at Orlando a lot throughout the course of this year, and they remind me a lot of the Cavs of last year. They play really, really hard. They do have multiple bigs in their front court. At times, they struggle on the offensive end. There are a lot of similarities between the Magic of this year and last year's Cavs. And that's probably not the kind of team stylistically that the Cavs would want to play in the first round. Now, it seems like they're going to avoid that because Orlando just won't go away. and they continue to rise up the standings, if anything. But that would be a tough first round matchup, and I think that would take a lot out of the Cavs if they were to even win that series. On the other side of that, because so much of playoff success is determined based on matchups and styles, Indiana is the kind of team that you feel like in a playoff environment in a 7 game series is not going to be the same caliber offense that we're seeing in this regular season. They're going to have to play in the half court more. They're not going to be able to get out in transition. And that doesn't mean that they can't play in the half court because they can. And Tyrese Halliburton is a load. And the pick and roll is very, very difficult. And the pick and pop and Pascal Siakam is going to be more comfortable as the season goes on and stuff like that. But the style of play that we're seeing, the free flowing style of play that we're seeing from the Pacers in the regular season is more regular season than it is postseason. So, because they have such problems on the defensive end of the floor, because they don't have the same kind of girth and burliness as some of the other teams in the Eastern Conference, I think the Cavs would love to face the Pacers in the first round of the playoffs. And I think they should want that kind of matchup because stylistically, that's not the kind of team that bothers the Cavs. The kind of team that bothers the Cavs, New York, Orlando, Miami, tough, physical, burly, long, athletic. That's not really Indiana.
Yeah, and I agree with you on the Magic because like they are so scrappy. Like you just look at their guards and they would be pestering Donovan, Darius, and that's another matchup that I don't think the Cavs will be able to utilize Sam Merrill as much. And we saw tonight how effective the Cavs are, and we already knew this, but it was reiterated because he struggled. But him making five threes and being able to go against a team that was long but wasn't able to close out as much on the perimeter as was shown by the 45 3-point attempts. You really get to see how effective Sam Merrill is, and having to go against a pesky backcourt like the Magic have, it's not favorable for the Cavs. And that's not also talking about the interior presence of Paolo Banchero. But I want to look at, just for fun, what would the postseason matchups look like right now after all the games on Wednesday? What the postseason matchups would look like. And let's just say that the eighth seed and the seventh seed make it through the play-in tournament, and those are the teams that make it. Okay, just for this little exercise. All right, Chris. Boston at 1, Denver at 1 for East and West. Boston would play Miami Heat, who's the eighth seed, and Denver would play the Dallas Mavericks, who are the eighth seed. I'm gonna just go through the East and then I'll go through the West altogether. So the two seed in the East is Cleveland. They would face the Indiana Pacers, which we mentioned would be a favorable matchup for the Cavs. And the three seed, Milwaukee, would face the six seed, Philadelphia. The four seed and five seed in the East would be New York and Orlando. And that rounds out the Eastern Conference. And all of those matchups would be really fun in my eyes. Obviously, it depends on, like you said, what version of Joel Embiid the 76ers get to face off with Giannis. And I mean, but you get Tyrese Maxey on Damian Lillard and Joel Embiid and Giannis, like that's nasty. And then you get the scrappy teams of the New York Knicks and the Orlando Magic. That's pretty good. And then Boston and Miami, like you get to really see what the Celtics, Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum are matched up with Jimmy Butler and what he brings. Those just seem nasty.
That's assuming that there are no upsets in the play-in tournament,
Correct.
obviously.
That just like I said, for this exercise, the eighth and the seventh seed are what they are ranked right now in the standings. So let's run through the Western Conference real quick. And I think these are fun too. Like I said, Denver takes on Dallas 1-8, Oklahoma City Thunder at 2, and the Phoenix Suns at 7. Minnesota Timberwolves at 3, Sacramento Kings at 6, and then the Clippers at 4, and the New Orleans Pelicans at 5. If the playoffs started right now, this would be a really, really fun playoff series for every team that is matched up, in my eyes.
If the playoffs started right now, who would you have in the NBA Finals from each side?
I think it's still what we've been saying. I think it's the number one seeds. I would go Boston and Denver.
I haven't seen anything recently to change my opinion on that either. I do think the Clippers loom as a threat.
I agree. You said that a couple of times, and I think you're right on that because, like, having to guard three the most prolific scorers, like, defenses is just in shambles, and especially with James Harden, like, truly becoming the point guard of that team and learning how to facilitate. Plus, Russell Westbrook might be coming back in time for the postseason. It's dirty for whatever team is playing defense.
And, I think we talked about this a few times on the podcast, and you touched on it a little bit tonight when it comes to Miami. There aren't a lot of teams where you look at them and say, seeding doesn't matter. If they get in, they understand how to flip a proverbial switch. They understand how to take themselves to a different level completely. Miami's one of those teams in the Eastern Conference where if they just get in, no matter where they're seated, they're going to be a threat. And I feel like to some degree that's how the Clippers are too, because Kawhi has won a championship, because Ty Lue has won a championship, because James Harden has gone far in the postseason, and he has a lot of playoff games under his belt. And Paul George has turned it up in the past in the playoffs. They understand that there's a different level that has to be reached in playoff basketball, and they understand how to get to that level because they've gotten to that level, right? They felt what it takes. They've seen what it takes. So to me, I mean, even if the Clippers fall a little bit here because who knows what's going to happen with Kawhi and this back issue that he's dealing with, they're one of those teams where I feel like regular season be damned if they get in, no matter where they're seated, they're going to be a threat and they're going to be the kind of team that very few at the top of the Western Conference want to see in the first round.
Yeah, Chris, and the one storyline that I don't think we've touched on yet that I think is kind of crazy is with the standings being as they are today, the Los Angeles Lakers and the Golden State Warriors would both miss the playoffs.
Yeah, I just think they're both dangerous though in a play-in situation.
And I can't disagree with you.
If you're Phoenix, do you want to see one of those teams in a play-in situation? If you're Dallas, do you want to see one of those teams in a play-in situation? I mean, they both have flaws, obviously. That's why they're 9 and 10 in the Western Conference. And I'm not sitting here saying that, well, if the Lakers get in, they're going to upset Denver in round 1. I'm talking about in a play-in situation where it's one game for everything. You got to play against Steph and Draymond and Clay. You got to play against LeBron and AD. Man, that's going to make you feel pretty queasy.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find when the last time both of these teams have been out of the playoffs, and I've just been scrolling.
Yeah, I don't know. You got to go back a long time, I would think.
Yeah, it's insane. Anyway, the messiness, the storylines, the matchups that we all got to go through today are exciting and make me excited for the playoffs. And also how the Cavs have played against tough opponents in their toughest stretch of the season. So I guess we'll have to see if they carry that over into the postseason.
I also think the exciting thing from the Cavs standpoint, Ethan, is that we all admit that there are teams that we feel like are on different level than Cleveland, but at the same time, even the Celtics have flaws. There is no flawless team out there. And there are weaknesses that can be exposed with any one of those opponents. You know what I mean? There isn't the looming Golden State Warriors dynasty sitting out there. There isn't the Cavs of the 4 years of going to the NBA Finals in the Big 3 era. That team doesn't exist this year. Even Boston, there are legitimate questions about how they're going to handle end of game situations, tightly contested games, pressure packed games, which Tatum is going to show up in end of game situations. Do they go to him? Do they go to Jalen Brown? Can their thinner than usual front line hold up in certain matchups? So even the Celtics, as dominant as they've been this year, it feels like there are weaknesses that can be exploited once you get into a 7-game series. And Milwaukee has played better since the All-Star break. There's no doubt about it, but there's things that the Bucks are still figuring out this deep into the season. And who knows what version of Chris Middleton is going to come back? How healthy is he going to be? How effective is he going to be? How is he going to blend into the fabric of the offense if the offense turns into primarily Dame Giannis pick and roll stuff? Is the defense that they have shown since the All Star break real? Is it a mirage? Are the Knicks going to be able to hold up? Jalen Brunson continues to battle these knick-knack things, and Julius Randle is still not healthy. And a lot of their guys play heavy minutes. And OG Anunoby, who's such a big, impactful player, can he stay healthy? Something that's been problematic for him throughout the course of his career. So, it just feels like the NBA in general is more wide open than it has been in the past. And there are some teams in the Eastern Conference that are more vulnerable than others that could allow the Cavs, if they get together at the right time, if they find their rhythm going into the playoffs, it could allow a team like the Cavs to capitalize on that and take advantage of that opportunity.
And Chris, the beauty of it is how messy this season is and how messy both the Western and Eastern Conference are. It's up in the air. So we'll just have to wait and see and keep you guys all tuned in with what's going on, especially with the Cavs, but also around the league. So, Chris, I think that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. Thank you again to Matt for the very in-depth question, and we're so glad you got to meet up with Chris during the Pelicans game tonight. But if you want to be a subscriber like Matt and give us questions that you want the answers to, or also just be friendly with me and Chris, you can subscribe to Subtext and become an insider of the Cavs Nation and interact with me and Chris. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from Chris and me. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.